Have you ever wondered what happened to those jaw-dropping cutting-edge tech gadgets that once seemed as though they came straight out of a sci-fi movie only to mysteriously vanish? From high-voltage neon signs to radiation-leaking cell phones, history is packed full of inventions that push the limits of innovation, sometimes a little too far. Today we'll show you 30 of the most dangerous tech gadgets that no longer exist. Early CRT televisions. Remember those massive old-school TVs that were so big they took over the entire living room? Well, they weren't only an eyesore, they were an accident waiting to happen. Inside those big beasts was a giant glass tube called a cathode ray tube, and it held an insane amount of energy. If you dropped one or cracked the screen the wrong way, you'd have a busted TV and a glass grenade in your hands. The screen could implode with terrifying force, launching razor-sharp shards in every direction. Picture yourself lugging one up the stairs, losing your grip, and being immediately put in the danger zone. Not exactly the cozy movie night you were hoping for. Exploding lithium-ion batteries. Back in the day, rechargeable batteries were like ticking time bombs. One moment you're plugging in your phone, and the next it's lighting up like the 4th of July, except way less fun and much more terrifying. Manufacturers were cutting corners using cheap materials that couldn't handle the heat. Phones, laptops, and hoverboards were bursting into flames out of nowhere, turning everyday gadgets into dangerous fire hazards. Some of the disasters took place while people were asleep, making them even more scary. It's safe to say that early batteries were a hot mess. Radium watches and clocks. Imagine having a watch that glowed in the dark. No more squinting at the clock at night. But there's a creepy part. That glow was radioactive. In the early 90s, watchmakers used radium, a glowing but highly dangerous material, to paint watch hands and numbers, and people loved the idea until they realized they were being slowly poisoned. Factory workers were the worst part. They were told to lick their paintbrushes for precision without knowing they were swallowing deadly radiation. Over time, workers and watches suffered serious illness. It turns out that glowing watches weren't worth the risk. Cigarette lighters in cars. Before USB chargers took over, cars had something way more risky: the cigarette lighter. Push the metal button, wait a few moments, and out came a red-hot coil ready to light your smoke. These things were tiny fire traps. Drivers would drop them in the seat, sparking fires before they even knew what happened. Curious children loved to press the button, not realizing they could seriously burn themselves, and if you grabbed it too soon, it was instant regret. It's no wonder why they quietly disappeared. It turns out having a miniature fireball in your car was not the best idea. Old microwave ovens. Microwaves are totally safe today, but the early ones were basically radiation machines sitting on your kitchen counter. Their shielding was so bad they leaked microwaves like a busted water pipe. Imagine heating up your pizza completely unaware you were getting a side order of radiation. People who used the early models for years began to feel weird, with headaches, dizziness, and all kinds of mystery symptoms. Science had not quite caught up, but let's say the machines weren't the best roommates either. Thankfully, manufacturers fixed the issues, but not without the early ones causing a lot of problem. Lead-soldered electronics. Before people cared about being eco-friendly, gadgets were held together with lead-based solder, aka toxic glue for electronics. It may sound harmless, but imagine fixing your phone and unknowingly breathing in poisonous fumes and getting lead all over your hands. Factory workers, electricians, and DIYers were constantly exposed. Lead poisoning doesn't hit you instantly. It creeps up, messing with your brain, nerves, and health over time. Thankfully, most countries have banned it, but for years, the sneaky toxin was everywhere. Telex machines. Think of an old-school fax machine, but on steroids, and that was the telex. Back in the day, it allowed people to send typed messages across a long distance, kind of like a prehistoric email. They were huge and power-hungry and dangerous, packed full of high-voltage wiring, and if you weren't careful, one wrong move would zap you like a bug. And don't get me started on the fire risk. They overheated so badly they could turn an office into a bonfire in no time. Floppy disks and drives. Imagine saving all your files on a device only to check later and they're gone. That was the nightmare of old-school storage gadgets. They were like the one unreliable friend who always bailed on you. One little mistake, like unplugging them too fast or hitting the wrong button, could erase everything in a flash. People lost their photos and projects and entire music collections just like that. It was a total disaster, and it's no surprise the gadgets disappeared faster than dial-up internet. Gas-powered irons. Before electric irons, ironing was a game of don't set the house on fire. People used irons that were powered by gas or kerosene, the same stuff that fuels your car. They had tiny fuel tanks attached, meaning that one small leak or spark and your laundry day turned into a disaster movie. Imagine trying to smooth out the wrinkles, hoping that your iron doesn't explode. It's not exactly a relaxing chore. While they got the job done, they were anything but safe. Fortunately, electric irons came along, sparing clothing and houses from unexpected fireworks shows. First-generation hoverboards. These gadgets were basically pocket-sized firecrackers. Their batteries were badly made and they could overheat out of nowhere, turning a harmless device into a full-blown fire hazard. Imagine sitting on your couch and scrolling through your phone, and suddenly it's a miniature explosion in your hands. Some fires were so bad they even torched entire rooms, and people ended in the hospital. Old-school electric blankets. Have you ever cuddled up under an electric blanket on a cold night? Back in the day, that cozy warmth could sometimes turn into a fiery surprise. Old electric blankets had sketchy wiring that could wear out, fray, and short-circuit over time, and the result was they got way hotter than they were supposed to. If you folded or bunched them up, it only made things worse, creating dangerous hotspots. But thankfully, the modern versions are way more safe. Pagers with lithium batteries. Ever had a gadget so badly built it could literally explode in your hands? Early technology had a fire problem thanks to batteries that overheated faster than a car baking in the sun. Imagine doing everyday activities when your gadget suddenly explodes into an instant fireball. They were so dangerous that airlines banned them, stores took them off the shelves, and the new hottest tech became a flaming disaster. Cheap, poorly made batteries were the culprit. Companies tried to fix the mess, but for some, it was game over. Tube radios. Tube radios were powered by high-voltage vacuum tubes, and those tubes turned into mini space heaters that could zap you if you weren't careful. They didn't only get warm, they could get hot enough to start a fire, and if you touched the wrong place, you'd get a shock strong enough to make you rethink your life choices. Back in the day, people relied on them for all kinds of electronics, but between the overheating, the fire risk, and the unexpected jolt, they became a thing of the past. Vintage hair dryers. Some old-school hair dryers were basically toxic blowtorches. Back in the day, companies thought it was fine to use asbestos, the same stuff that can wreck your lungs, as insulation inside of hair dryers. Every time someone styled their hair, they were unknowingly blasting themselves with invisible danger. Years later, science finally connected the dots, and the hazardous hair tools were pulled from the shelf. But by then, plenty of people had already breathed in the bad stuff, which led to cancers like mesothelioma. Early video game consoles. Back in the day, early gaming consoles didn't only overheat, they practically cooked themselves from the inside out. I'm not talking about a little warmth, they got scorching hot to the point where people wondered if they were going to explode. Cooling systems back then were terrible, consoles could randomly shut off or even begin smoking, and gamers got so desperate they stuck their consoles on ice packs just to keep them from melting down. First-gen laptops. Back in the day, having a laptop was like owning a piece of the future, until that future began smoking right in front of you. Early laptops had a habit of overheating, making the batteries swell up like overinflated balloons. And if that wasn't terrifying enough, some even cracked open, oozing weird chemicals, and then they burst into flames. Imagine typing away on your laptop when it suddenly got hotter than a frying pan. Before you know it, the thing explodes, and some companies had to rush to recall the fiery disasters, while others just crossed their fingers hoping no one would notice. Glass baby bottles. Before plastic took over, baby bottles were made out of glass. They may have looked nice, but they had a big problem. They broke way too easily. A sleep-deprived parent fumbling with a bottle at 2 a.m. could break one easily, and milk would go everywhere along with glass and a whole lot of regret. Let's not forget the babies, one excited wiggle or slippery grip, and instant mess and possible injury. It was a disaster waiting to happen, and thankfully plastic came to the rescue, though they brought their own problems as well. Old vacuum cleaners. Vintage vacuums weren't only bad at cleaning, they actually made things worse by spewing out microscopic dust, allergens, and in some cases even asbestos. This would end up turning what should have been a simple chore into a serious health hazard. Thankfully, modern vacuums come with HEPA filters that actually trap the bad stuff instead of launching it into your lungs. Mercury thermometers. Mercury thermometers had to be pulled off the market because they were basically ticking time bombs full of mercury. If they broke, the toxic liquid inside could turn your home into a hazard zone. Mercury isn't only dangerous, it's the kind of stuff that can damage your brain, your nerves, and even make you seriously sick by breathing in the fumes. Imagine dropping one by accident and suddenly having to evacuate like it's a chemical spill. It's no wonder they stopped making them. It was like having a tiny invisible health hazard in your pocket. Electric shock therapy. Back in the early 1900s, people believed in all kinds of wild things that would make them healthier, and some were really dangerous. There were gadgets that zapped you with electricity, belts that shook your body like a washing machine, and devices that promised to boost your vitality, but most left people bruised, burned, and worse. Science had not quite caught up with common sense, and many of the health boosters did more harm than good. While they were marketed as miracle cures, they often ended in accidents, broken bones, and a trip to the hospital. Early handheld gaming consoles. Some gaming gadgets back in the day were coated with paint that had lead, the same stuff that can mess with your health. And the worst part is kids were at risk. Imagine a child chewing on a toy or licking their fingers after touching it. Lead poisoning could cause all kinds of problems and learning issues and serious health scares. It's no surprise the products were pulled off the shelves, and looking back, it's wild to think that something as simple as paint turned a cool gadget into a hidden danger. Radioactive smoke detectors. Back in the day, some things actually had radioactive material inside. Older models used a substance that sounds like it belongs in a superhero origin story. The tiny and powerful element was packed into devices like smoke detectors to help them sense fires. While it wasn't super dangerous in small amounts, the idea of having something radioactive sitting in your home is unsettling. Over time, safer alternatives came along, and manufacturers decided it was best to leave the radioactive stuff to science labs. Pushcard machines. In the early days of computers, there were gadgets so clunky and hazardous that they felt like a game of chance. These old-school devices had heavy moving parts that could slam shut without warning, and if your fingers were in the wrong place at the wrong time, say goodbye to a digit. It was like sticking your hand inside a tiny, unpredictable guillotine. They may have helped to shape modern computing, but it's not worth it considering you could lose a finger just for typing a memo. High-voltage neon signs. Back in the day, neon signs weren't bright and flashy, they were also shockingly dangerous. The old versions used high-voltage transformers with zero protection, meaning if you got too close or touched the wrong part, you could end up being zapped by a nasty electric shock. Imagine walking down a busy street admiring a glowing diner sign, and then you get shocked to death. Let's say the signs weren't exactly designed with safety in mind, and thankfully the modern versions are much safer. Old street lights with PCB ballasts. Imagine your favorite gadget secretly poisoning the planet. It sounds like the plot of a science fiction horror movie, but that's exactly what happened with older tech that contained PCBs. The nasty chemicals were once a common ingredient in electronics, from cool-looking vintage televisions to industrial equipment, but they were also highly toxic. Scientists later discovered they weren't only bad for people, they were actually wrecking the environment, contaminating the water, the air, and even the wildlife. Eventually, government stepped in and said enough is enough, and they banned PCBs for good. Mechanical adding machines. Imagine trying to do quick math only to have a machine nearly take your finger off. Calculators weren't the sleek and pocket-sized gadgets we have now. They were bulky and clunky contraptions packed with heavy metal gears that spun and clicked like something out of a steampunk nightmare. If you weren't careful, the sharp and fast-moving parts could snag your fingers, and people had to operate them with precision or risk more than a miscalculation. Losing a few numbers was one thing, but losing fingers was another. Car phones with huge antennas. Back in the day, early car phones weren't just bulky and expensive, they also blasted out crazy amounts of electromagnetic radiation. levels so high that if you spent too much time talking, you may have felt like you were getting a free microwave session. Early mobile beasts needed powerful signals to connect to calls, which meant pumping out way more energy than today's sleek smartphones. Thankfully, technology got better, and we did away with radioactive relics before people began to glow in the dark. Gas tube telephones. Did you know some of the earliest telephones were tiny time bombs waiting to go off? Back in the day, they used gas tubes to function, but there was a small problem. If something went wrong, they could explode like a firecracker. Imagine trying to make a call to a friend when suddenly your phone lights up in your hand. Not the kind of connection you were hoping for. Safer designs came along and eliminated these death traps. Analog TV transmitters. The massive broadcasting towers sent out super strong electromagnetic waves, and not everyone was thrilled about it. Some worried that being near them too long might mess with their health, causing everything from headaches to more serious issues. There were even wild theories that signals could interfere with brain activity and make people sick without them even realizing it. While science debated whether the danger was real or paranoia, one thing was clear: the towers were powerful, and standing too close to one felt like being zapped by an invisible force. First electric fans. Back in the day, fans weren't the sleek and safe appliances we have now. They had sharp and exposed metal blades that spun at high speeds, just waiting to slice anything that got too close. People learned the hard way that sticking your hand near one was a bad idea, and if that wasn't enough, the fans were often unstable, tipping over and breaking as easily as they broke skin. It's no surprise they were eventually redesigned with protective grills, because let's be honest, nobody wants a fan that doubles as a death trap. Which of these long-lost gadgets did you find the most shocking? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and also make sure that you're subscribed to the channel so that you never miss a video like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.